Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. It's on ISO 42001 and the EU AI Act, Building a Foundation for Compliance. So I hope you're all well this afternoon. We've got a good panel organised, and I'll just start introducing everybody now. So this is me, Sophie Sayer, Sales Director at IT Governance. We're now formally part of GRC Solutions. We've just gone through a big rebrand. So those of you who are joining us for the first time in a while, you'll definitely notice a few changes. So this is me on the screen. I've been with the group for about 16 years now, 15, 16 years. And I started actually in the publishing division, where we publish a whole host of books and toolkits around information security and related topics, and have since moved into channel. So we have a channel division working with about 400 MSPs worldwide, and more latterly sort of heading up the sales team along with our CSO to bring organisations a better cybersecurity posture. So without further ado, I'll just give you a bit of information about us. So we offer end-to-end support. As you can see on the slide, we are covering all sorts of risk management services, providing clients with comprehensive solutions and tailored packages. So we do some bespoke packages as well. We offer a global reach, so we've got offices worldwide. We have future-proof strategies, so we are committed to helping clients stay ahead of emerging threats. And of course, we are a one-stop shop. So if any of you have been on our website or would like to have a little look on our website, you will notice there are oodles of products and services on there relating to all your cybersecurity needs. This slide just kind of summarises everything I've just said. So cybersecurity, of course, risk management solutions as well, data privacy expertise, so DPO as a service and the like, and also our kind of flagship product, which is our 27001 support. Just a few reminders before we get started today. You will all be muted during the session. You can submit questions in the chat function, so please do send those in, and hopefully we'll have about 15 minutes at the end to answer those. And also we will email you a copy of the presentation slides and the recording at the end, and it will have kind of clickable links to things that we're talking about along the way. So here we go. This is the exciting bit. I'd like to introduce our panelists for today's discussion. And first up, we have Andrew Pattison. He's our head of GRC and PCI consultancy. Andrew, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody isn't too hot. It's even managed to get warm where I am in Northern Ireland, and that doesn't happen very often. So, yes, so as Sophie's just said, I'm the global head of GRC and PCI consultancy. Been working in GRC for more years than I care to remember. But I head up basically the function within the business. I work with a lot of clients. There's a couple of examples there. But from the AI point of view, I'm leading on the work in relation to 42001, the ISO standard, what we're going to do about gap, auditing, implementation, all the work around that. And as you can see there, there's a book on there. So last year I published a book through the organisation on DORA, and I'm also in the final stages, which will be coming out towards the end of July, book on AI risk and governance. And that will be really exciting, more so than Dora. But that's just basically who I am. Okay, thank you, Sophie.
Andrew definitely makes the topic a little bit more lighthearted. What can be quite a dry topic, Andrew, is definitely a good personality to have on side. So thank you, Andrew. Moving on, so we've got our next SME today. We've got Camden, our group head of AI product marketing. Camden, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hi, so yeah, I'm Camden. As Sophie says, I head up the AI product marketing here. So I guess my focus is all about making AI practical for businesses, especially when it comes to kind of the governance, risk and compliance side of things. So I work on developing AI compliance products that can help businesses tackle regulatory challenges, things like the EU AI Act that we're going to talk about today. But I also work on the internal strategy side of things too. So finding ways that AI can streamline our own operations, working with staff to enable AI literacy, that kind of thing. So yeah, it's a really exciting space to be working in, and happy to be here today.
Thank you, Camden. It's lovely to have you on the panel. And last but not least, we have Adam. So Adam's our Head of Information Security here at IT Governance. Adam, would you just like to say a few words about yourself?
Hi, so as Sophie said, I'm Adam Seamons. I'm Head of InfoSec for GRC Solutions. I've worked in IT and InfoSec for around 15 years. I currently manage our information security program and our broader technological risk across the business, of which AI and machine learning are now a core part of. And I've been with the group for the past 8 years.
Thank you very much, Adam. Perfect. So that's the panel for today. We've got a whole wealth of knowledge waiting to give you some really good information on AI. So here's the agenda in front of us. We're going to talk about how ISO 42001 supports your alignment with the EU AI Act. We're going to talk about the AI Act and how it applies and what it means for you and your organisation. Building AI risk into security and compliance processes. You won't want to say that after you've had a few drinks. ISO 42001 audit readiness. That's also very important, and the documentation that can support. Common challenges. We're going to talk about AI documentation from a security perspective. Practical steps as well, and of course, how we can help. So that's the agenda for today. Like I said, we're going to be running for about an hour. Hopefully presenting for about 40 minutes of that time, and then with time for questions at the end. Don't forget to start submitting them, and we can be having a look at those as the webinar continues this afternoon. So in order to make it a little bit more interactive for you, we are going to run a few polls in today's webinar. So do get your fingers on the buzzers. We've got a question coming up here. If you can all answer this. What is your biggest compliance challenge within AI today? So you've got 5 things to choose from. If you can start submitting your answers now, that would be wonderful. I'm just looking at the results coming in. Perhaps the most popular answer is getting a handle on AI risk in a structured way. That seems to be the most popular, although still some answers coming in. Nearly 70% of you have voted, so just wait for the rest of you. Perfect. Okie doke. That's just closed. So yeah, the most popular way or the most popular answer was getting a handle on AI risk in a structured way. So that's your biggest compliance challenge. Fantastic. Thank you for all participating in that. I'm going to pass you now to Andrew. He's going to talk about how can ISO 42001 help organisations get aligned with the AI Act in practice. Over to you, Andrew.
Okay, then, just a quick question there. Right, so a very short statement there, but quite an important question. So how can ISO 42001 help organisations get aligned with the AI Act in practice? It can actually be a bit more broad than this. It could be any AI regulation that an organisation has to do. So what we need to think about, first of all, is at a very high level, what does the AI Act require organisations to do? And be more detailed as we go through here. So if you think about it, interestingly, after that poll, risk management. So risk management is key in there. Data quality and governance around your data, documentation around life cycle and all those wonderful areas. Human oversight, okay, big key area in AI. You know, human beings have to be involved in this somewhere. Accuracy, a word I can't say. Robustness and what you've got to do about cyber. Quality, making sure that you're getting quality out the back end of this, and how you deal with third parties and all those AI sort of things. So in no way does that describe what the AI Act is, but those are the sort of things that you're going to have to deal with. So I think the first question is you sit there and you go, right, where do I start? How do I start dealing with this problem? So that is where something like 42001 comes into practice or into real benefit. Now, my background's ISO 27001, 22301, 9001, all these different systems, and they basically have lots of things in common. So for those of you who've got familiarity with 27001, when I'm going to talk with you, or any of those other standards, this is all makes sense. It's simple. 42001 is an artificial intelligence management system. So what do we mean by that? Very, very straightforwardly. It gives you a structure to deal with the problem. It gives you an ability to do certain things, which means you're going to have to deal with it. Now, ISO standards are split quite often into two parts: clauses, which is the system, and then controls. So what you get within the clauses is you have to do certain things. So one of the things you have to do is you have to define what the context of the organization is. You then have to define your legal, contractual, and regulatory requirements. So straight away, you refer to AI, the AI Act, in the contractual requirements. That means you then start developing your 42001 to help you meet the requirements of the EU AI Act. Now, what people don't always realize is that actually ISO standards are incredibly flexible and pragmatic. They're not binary. They don't say this is what you must do. They say you do something. And what do you do something based on? Risk. Okay. So back to that question there, everybody, risk. So core to how ISO 42001, works is that it's understanding risks and impacts in relation to artificial intelligence. Based on that, you then implement controls, similar to what you do in 27001. And the controls in 42001 cover, and I'm looking at the list here because my memory isn't that good: policies, internal organization, resourcing, assessing impacts, system lifecycle, data for AI systems, information for interested parties, use of AI systems, and third parties. So based on what your risks are, you can then implement those controls. Now, another thing which is very important with anything with an ISO system is that it's not just those controls you can implement. If you get to the point where there's something specific from the AI Act that you want to implement as a control, you can add it to your control set. So it gives you that flexibility. And the key thing is that when you implement it, it is your system. Okay. So the 42001, when you implement it into business, fulfills your requirements. So it gives you, in summary, a formalized structure for dealing with your problems. So you might have to be dealing with the AI Act in the EU, but you might have to deal with other countries or regulatory things within other organizations, so, or countries or regions. So that will give you the structure to make sense of this rather complicated and developing and fast moving requirement over the next few years. So that's how you do that. Okay, Sophie, thank you.
Thank you very much. Perfect. There's a few questions coming through in the chat, Andrew. So you're obviously sparking a little bit of interest here, which is brilliant. Whilst Andrew looks at those, we're going to move on to the next question, and we're going to ask Camden to answer this one. Who exactly does the EU AI Act apply to, and what should organisations be doing about it? Over to you, Camden.
So I think this is one of those questions that seems really simple until you actually try to explain it. Short version is the Act applies to anyone who's putting an AI system on the EU market or using one in the EU. So it doesn't matter where your company is based. If your AI system touches the EU, it's in scope. But the thing is, it doesn't treat all AI the same. So it's based on risk levels. You've got minimal risk at one end, so things like spam filters. Then there's limited risk where you have got transparency obligations, and then high risk. So this is where most of the regulation lives. And then lastly, there are outright ban systems. So this applies to AI that's used for things like social scoring, manipulative behavioral profiling, that kind of thing. So most of the compliance effort is focused on that high risk category. So again, like things like biometric IDs, credit scoring, even like recruitment tools, AI in education. All of these systems come with quite a lot of obligations. So documentation, risk management, human oversight, etc. But I would say the thing is, even if you are nowhere near the end of that spectrum, you're not completely off the hook. So if you're using something like a chatbot like ChatGPT or any kind of other Gen AI tool that creates content, you still have to meet transparency requirements. And what that basically means is that people need to know when they're interacting with AI, and they need to be able to tell when content's been artificially generated. And I think here the bit that's going to catch a lot of people out is that even if you're not building AI systems yourself, which I think probably is the case for most businesses, so you've bought them in, you've embedded them, or you've customized somebody else's tool, you probably under the AI Act still have responsibilities. So you need to make sure that system is being used as intended, that it's appropriate for your use case, and also that it's not just kind of quietly introducing risks that you hadn't accounted for. So in terms of what businesses should actually be doing, I think the first step is just to get a clear picture of what you're actually using. So I don't just mean the obvious stuff, because nowadays like AI is showing up everywhere. It's in CRMs, HR tools, I mean even PowerPoint. So it's often embedded, and a lot of people don't realize they're using it. So definitely step one is visibility, and then once you've got that, you really need to kind of figure out your role. So under the Act, you might be a provider, a deployer, distributor, possibly even more than one. And with each of these roles comes different obligations. So it's really important to understand where you sit. And then once you've got that piece, you can start to look at risk levels. So is the system high risk? Does it trigger transparency requirements? Are you using AI in a way that affects individuals or decisions about them? Because that's when the obligations start to stack up. And I think, like, practically speaking, this means getting your governance in place. So, things like internal policies, risk registers, documentation, as I say, they don't need to be perfect straight away, but you do need to have something in place just so you're not starting from zero when the rules kick in. And I would say, like, don't wait. So you might not be in scope yet, or the rules might not apply to kind of your tools or use cases until next year. But I would say that if you're using AI in any meaningful way, it's probably only a matter of time before someone, whether that's like a regulator, a customer, a partner, whoever, asks how you're managing it. And the last thing you want is to be caught out. And actually, I think it's bigger than compliance. I think the Act does give organizations a real framework to build trust. And I think that if you can say, here's how we make sure our AI is kind of fair, safe, and explainable, that can be really useful, especially in sectors where people are already nervous about automation. So yeah, I would say kind of, who does it apply to? Probably more businesses than you think. And then what should you do? Start by understanding kind of your AI landscape, get clarity on your role, assess the risks, and then kind of roll that into your broader governance strategy.
Perfect. Thank you, Camden. That was really, really helpful. Again, lots of food for thought here and sparking some questions in the chat. So just to say, by the way, if you do submit a question and we don't get around to answering it on this webinar, we will try and follow up with you afterwards. So there's a lot to get through today. So next is we're going to pass over to Adam. And the question for Adam is, how can InfoSec teams build AI risk into existing security and compliance processes? That's a good one. Over to you, Adam.
Okay, so From a security perspective, I think one of the most practical steps we can take is to stop treating AI as something that is abstract or experimental and start treating it as part of the tech stack. So in the same way that, cloud came in and we adopted it as part of the tech stack, we need to start thinking of AI and the tools that it's going to do as part of that. So that means it's subject to the same risk and compliance and assurance expectations as we would do any piece of software or hardware that's in our production environments. So, of course, that starts with visibility. If AI tools are being used in the business, whether it's ChatGPT, embedded AI in a SaaS platform, or if you're looking at kind of like a homegrown model that you're developing, they need to be identified. They need to be logged. So we need to get that asset inventory and an understanding of what they are, where they're being used. That includes where it's hosted geographically as well, and what data they access and who's using them. You can't protect things you can't see. And, there's going to be data privacy elements that we should already be prepared for. There's going to be business continuity and other business risks that we need to be assessing against AI tools and LM tools. So once you know what you're dealing with, we apply the basics. So we're talking threat modeling, access control, secure configuration, data classification, and then output validation. With any kind of automation, whether it's AI or something like that, you want to make sure the stuff it's putting out is valid. That could be figures, that could be decisions, and then continuously monitoring that. AI doesn't get a free pass just because it's clever, and it's very easy to fall into the trap of it's a machine, so it must be right. And as Camden touched with bias, if anyone has used ChatGPT or Claude, it can very easily tell you that's a great idea, but it's a product and it wants you to use it. So we need to, use some common sense and say, well, is it a good idea? It can also introduce new vulnerabilities, things that we've never dealt with before. It can enable data leakage or create unintentional biases and echo chambers. So if an AI tool can influence a business decision or generate content, it should go through the same level of scrutiny as any other new system or code release. So one of the things that we're hearing a lot about from companies like OpenAI is how great these platforms are at producing code. We have processes to ensure that human developers are producing code that is correct, and we need to make sure that we're doing the same thing with the AI ones. Obviously, documentation plays a key role, so it's not just for ISO 42001 or the EU Act compliance, but maintaining accountability in our businesses. If a model fails or a decision is challenged, we need to be able to, so we, the organization, need to be able to explain why and who approved it. And that doesn't mean drowning in paperwork, which is sometimes the feeling with some of these GRC subjects or compliance. It means documenting ownership, risk assessments, and assurance activities, and change control in a way that reflects the reality of how we operate, not just kind of a fantasy situation that we kind of wish we were in. And then finally, there's the kind of cultural matters. So AI innovation's not going to stop. The genie's out of the bottle. So we can either help guide it, put guardrails in, or we can get left behind and try to bolt on controls later. And over the years we've talked about security by design, DevSecOps, privacy by design. Those things still apply here. We still need to be building those things into our tools and into our processes. And organizations that get that right will be the ones that embed AI governance into existing security and compliance processes. And these aren't going to be blockers. These are going to be enablers that allow the innovation to happen in a safe and rapid way. And that means showing the teams that are using them how to experiment safely and helping them understand the risks and giving them the frameworks in a light touch enough way, but with a strong enough hand to ensure that they stand up to an audit or a breach, and we can review them.
Thank you, Adam. That was really good. Okay, so we've heard from all of our panelists now this afternoon. So just take a quick breather, let them have a glass of water. Whilst they do that, we are going to get on with the next poll. So again, make sure you're able to submit an answer to this one. The question is, how would you rate your organisation's current AI governance maturity? So if you can all submit an answer, I can see how many of you have voted. So absolutely get involved if you can. The most popular answer at the moment is coming in at just starting AI in use, but no formal governance. Well, it's perfect that you're on this call today with us then, because hopefully we can just help guide you a little bit. Okay, we're now over 75% voted, so keep answering if you can. It looks like that answer has definitely won the vote. So it sounds like the majority of you on this webinar this afternoon are just starting in your AI journey. Perfect. Okie doke. Brilliant. We will, without further ado, go on to the next question. So we'll go back to Andrew. Andrew, what does audit readiness look like under ISO 42001, and how should organisations approach documentation? Over to you.
Okay then, so as we start with that, based on that poll, the biggest one was about governance, lack of governance, so you haven't got that in place. It's what 42001 will give you. Now, it gives you that structure. It gives you the ability to understand what you're doing and why you're doing it, what the benefits are, what the risks are, and addressing those risks in a meaningful way. So more onto the bits. So we're implementing an AI management system against 42001, which again gives you that big structure to do things. So what does a readiness look like when you want to be an audited? So if any of you have got any other ISO systems out there, you'll know what you need. It looks like, particularly with documentation. So you've got your clauses which cover your things like your context, legal and regulatory requirements, impact analysis, risk assessments, risk treatment. And there are, across those, certain areas which you are mandatorily required to document. Now, if we actually look at it across 42001, in the clauses there's 8, it refers to mandatory documentation in 8 places. In the controls, it refers to it 25 times. But it's not just mandatory documentation you've got to think about. So what you actually do within 42001, I'll get it right at some point, is that you document not only what is mandated or mandatory, you document to a level which enables your system to operate in an effective and efficient manner. And it all depends how complex you are and everything about how far you go down the documentation. Again, you may not be implementing all of the controls, so you don't need to document about the controls you're not implementing. Now, why wouldn't you implement all of the controls? Well, one very straightforward thing there is that you do your controls based on risk, and some of the controls are very specifically around development. Okay, so if you're not doing development, you're not going to be doing those controls. So if you think about, there's 2 types of use cases: people who use AI and people who develop it. So if you think about some very simple things that you'd need to do is, so you've got to think about your risks, your impacts, and your treatment relating to those. There's some key other things that you need to do. You need to do management review, needs to be documented. So management review is when you sit down with the owner of the system or the scope, whoever is the most senior person, and at least annually you sit there and you go through all these different things about what you're doing about risks, what you're doing about your interested parties, what you're doing about measurement. Can you see the system is performing? So back to that question about what we just asked there, it gives you that governance approach. It gives you that structure to deal with things. You then sit there and you've also got to make sure that your scope is documented and anything specifically required within the standard. You then go through, if anybody's familiar, the first thing that you would need to do an internal audit. Now, very interesting thing on internal audits, the way ISO standards are sort of written, it's a bit vague about what they actually require you to do. So you've got to prove that you've got an internal audit schedule, and you need to demonstrate to the certification body that this is an effective and efficient system in place to do that. So the simplest thing to do, and I'd always recommend to anybody when they're going for certification, is to do a full system internal audit. Okay. Whether you actually physically have to do a full system is a bit of an open for debate, but it's always best for you. It makes your life a lot easier. You then go to stage 1 audit, which is basically they come in and make sure that you have demonstrate that you've got a system based on your documentation. A certain amount of period later, they'll come in and do stage 2, where they want to see evidence of your AI management system running. Okay, so there's normally a bit of a gap between them. So you've got to have your mandatory documentation and the documentation that you need for your management system, and those need to be available to be audited. And at the end of stage 2, you get that nice little certificate saying that you're certified against 42001. Sounds really easy, doesn't it? Bit of effort involved. Okay then. Right. Thank you, Sophie.
Very much. Brilliant. Okay. We're going back to Camden then. So, Camden, what are some of the most common challenges you're seeing when it comes to preparing for AI?
I think probably this is one of the most important questions at the moment, because obviously everyone wants to get the benefits of AI, but nobody wants to end up in the press for getting it wrong. I think the first thing to say is, and we kind of touched upon this in our last panel discussion, but innovation and governance don't necessarily have to be in conflict. So you don't need to kill all momentum to stay compliant. And I'd say, in fact, like businesses that are moving the fastest here are the ones that have built some guardrails in early. One thing that works well is kind of creating safe spaces to test new tools. So without letting them loose in production straight away. And this doesn't need to be like some high-tech thing. It can just be a basic rule that says, you know, if you're piloting something, it happens in a sandbox. So no real customer data, no critical systems. And I think that kind of one change alone would remove a lot of the risk from early stage innovation. And I think probably the second most important thing is just bringing the right people in from the start. So not everything needs a steering committee, but like if you've got product or marketing experimenting with AI, you kind of need to loop someone in from legal or risk early on, and that way any red flags can get caught before things are too far along. And you also kind of avoid that last minute panic where a project gets blocked before it even launches. And I think another big thing is that when we're talking about AI governance, somebody needs to own it, and it's still like a relatively new concept. And I think, you know, in a lot of companies, we've seen it with ourselves, it's just floating between teams. But if no one has clear accountability, nothing gets formalized. So kind of, even if it's just giving someone the brief of coordinating AI activity across the business, I think that can make a massive difference. And I'd probably also just recommend like building a basic AI review setup before launch. And again, like this doesn't have to be anything complex, just kind of like a 15-minute check-in. Someone asks what data's going in, what decision is the system making, who might be affected, and can we even explain how it works? And I think usually that's enough to flag whether something's fine, or whether like you need to go back and dig a bit deeper. And kind of tying it back in, I do think this is where things like 42001 can be useful, because even if you're not going for certification straight away, the structure that standard gives you, so on things like roles, documentation, monitoring, can be really useful for helping you scale AI responsibly without creating loads of friction.
Thank you, Camden. Perfect. We are motoring along quite nicely. We have got about 20 minutes left, so we will pass now to Adam for this question. What does good enough AI documentation look like from a security perspective? That's open to interpretation, isn't it? Go for it,
Yeah,
Adam.
that's a fun one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Honestly, good enough means it works at the end of the day. It tells a clear story about what the AI system is, what it's doing, where the risks sit, and also who's accountable for it. You don't necessarily need 40 pages of waffle. What you need is something that stands up when it's challenged, and challenged by an auditor, or law enforcement, or even your management team, or anything like that. So whether that's, I mean, it could just be an internal stakeholder who's just asking. So that's what we are aiming for. We talk about audit readiness, particularly for the ISO 42001, and that includes things like impacts assessments, risk registers, control mapping, but they only add value if you're actually using them. So security teams are good at this when it means keeping things simple, documenting those decisions, defining the ownership, and making sure that what's on paper is what's actually happening in reality. Good example is AI output review. I think it's something that Camden touched on earlier. If a system generates content or decisions, we should record how that output is tested. What happens if it goes wrong? Who's responsible for checking it? And that doesn't have to be 100% formalized in sort of a brand new process. It can be baked into an existing assurance or QA workflow, or a CAB, a change approval board, something like that. The EU AI Act expects organisations to be able to explain how their AI systems work, how risks are being managed, how decisions are being monitored, and ISO 42001 gives us the framework for doing that. So the challenge is making the documentation practical enough that people actually maintain it. That's where the InfoSec team really needs to get involved and help the business or your organization, particularly where we've already built those habits in for things like our 27001 or our data privacy compliance, SOC 2. And those habits, those need to be sort of pushed out through the rest of the business.
Okie doke. So we've got a question now, which all three of you can answer if you're feeling up to it. A bit of a panel discussion. So, what practical steps can organisations take to keep AI innovation moving while staying legally and ethically on track? Andrew, I'll come to you first on this, if that's okay.
Yeah, not a problem. Yeah, this is practical. Okay, so right, let's just set the thing is that where are we with AI? So we're at the beginning of the journey. AI is going to do lots of things, impact on lots of things, and change lots of things that we're going to do, how we do them, when we do them, all these sort of things. How it's actually going to look in 5 years' time, does anybody really know? Where we are at the moment is there is a lot of, I'm going to use the word hype about AI. Everywhere you look, someone goes, this is powered by AI, this is this, etc., etc. So we've got a bit of a, like, it's the bright new shiny thing in the room. Now, I've been around since before the internet was invented, okay? And we do get this hype, and you get this in the industry where this is going to be this and all that sort of stuff, and then it settles down. So there's a lot of pressure that we have to be using AI. And you'll be getting it from senior people. Where are we using AI? Blah, doing all this, etc., and all that sort of stuff. So from a practical point, you need to ask one question. And actually, this is the same question you ask anything to do with governance, risk, and compliance. 27001 business continuity is why? Why do we need to use this? Now, if the question is why, and the answer is this gives us value, great, do it. Okay. And if it gives its value, so that gives us an opportunity, and you need to understand the risks. If you understand the opportunity and you understand the risks and you manage the risks, brilliant, go for it. But you have to ask, why are we doing this? Is this actually going to give us any benefit? Now, automation and speeding up things and reducing the time to do things, that's great. But remember, there's certain processes that we do as organizations where it's actually built in. There's time, okay? There's processes in place to make sure that things are correct, like air gaps. You think about it, you don't have the same person in a accounting department who authorizes purchase orders and then pays the invoicing, okay? So if you're suddenly doing this by AI and AI can do all of that, well, where's the checks and balances, etc. So the key practical thing with AI is ask that question, why? And that's actually useful in lots of things. Why are we doing it? Does it give us value? Does it give something, help the organization meet its objectives? Does it drive benefit? Yes. What are the risks? Understand the risks, mitigate them. And if you do that, because this is all new, etc., and all that sort of stuff, and you just need to think about it, it's very similar to a concept about when you're doing something like phishing exercise and all that sort of stuff with security. All we want people to do is think about things before they do it, and you hesitate and you think, why am I doing this? So always just, that's the one thing I do for anything is just go, why am I doing that? So that's my view on that little question there. Okay, thank you, Sophie.
Okay, Adam, would you like to comment on that one?
Yeah, so for me, the first step is sort of treating AI like it's not smoke and mirrors and magic, and really kind of looking at it as just another piece of technology that's come into the industry. It's disruptive, of course, but there's a history of these things. The internet, mobile phones, cloud computing, all of these things are disruptive technologies, and the challenges change, the risks change, and we have to adapt with that, but we don't throw everything that we've already learned out the window. And a lot of the things that we've sort of talked about in these ISO standards or the legislation are very similar. If you look at 27001, look at the risk assessments, understand your assets, treat those things appropriately. And, as Andrew said quite a lot, almost all of this is about focusing on risk, treating those risks, mitigation, but then also getting the accreditation part as well. So the other thing is, don't make it an entirely separate governance track, I think is one of the things. If we fall into the trap of we've got an ISMS over here for information security, we have a PMI, the privacy information, over one here. And before you know it, it's not one flowing group of documents that help us manage these things. It's a compliance obligation that is split into, multiple areas, and that becomes unwieldy. A lot of organizations are waiting for full maturity before doing anything. And I think that's fair, but at the same time, start to prepare, start to look at the policies that you've got for your different processes and think, well, how is AI going to impact that? Even if you're not necessarily going to seek 42001 today, but you might do, it's worth looking at some of your policies that you have or your documentation and building these things in to mature it over time. And to be honest, it would be better to have 70% governance of your AI and have people actually using that and getting the benefits for it before you decide to chase that kind of certification. And finally, I think we need to involve people who are actually building and using the tools. So getting the right stakeholders involved. So, if that's your software developers who are building things, get them into the process, make sure they're aware of it, talk about the risks. The same with marketeers. If they're in there using tools, trying to get the benefits, get them in the conversation. Data analysts. AI has become very accessible, and that means that the people we're involving in these conversations needs to be broader. And you know, people throughout the business are going to be experimenting with AI. And if they're left out the loop, the governments won't land. And it's InfoSec's job in particular for our area to guide and not dictate. We don't want to be the department of no. We're not looking to stifle innovation. It's happening regardless. So it's about helping make a success of that, to give the teams the confidence to innovate without walking into kind of a compliance minefield. So that's my take.
Yeah, it's good advice, Adam. And actually, it's like any compliance journey, isn't it? It's better to be doing something than nothing, even if you're not going for the full certification. So brilliant. Camden, have you got any practical advice on this one that you'd like to add?
I think some really good points being made. I think really I'd probably just largely echo what Adam said. So I think a lot of the tension that we're seeing between kind of innovation and compliance just comes from this idea that AI is some kind of special use case. But kind of I think actually the more we treat AI like any other kind of powerful business tool and like the kind of thing that you wouldn't roll out with due diligence, I think it just becomes a lot manageable. So yeah, and also Andrew mentioned processes. I think one really practical step is just to embed AI thinking into your existing processes instead of creating brand new ones. So like if you've already got a DPI process, for example, bring AI into those. You don't need to wait to kind of build an AI specific framework from scratch. Like use processes that people already understand. And then again, like we're talking about people, don't ignore the cultural side of things, because like this concept of like shelfware, the same can apply to policies. You can have the best policies in the world, but I think if the culture is still kind of move fast, ask for forgiveness, and this is a real problem that we see with shadow AI, it's just not going to work. So I think what works well is just creating a space where people can feel comfortable raising concerns or kind of asking what if questions, but without being shut down. Because I think at the end of the day, we really have to kind of keep in mind AI is relatively new for a lot of people, and I also just think the risks aren't necessarily obvious until someone says them out loud. So yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Camden, you do a great job in our organisation of keeping us all on track and up to speed and informed, because like you've all said today, it's very fast moving and changing all the time. Thank you very much. We'll do our last poll, I believe, of today. So question coming up, if you can all have a little look. What's your top priority for AI compliance in the next 6 to 12 months? So if you just let us know what's your top priority, you can put your votes in, that would be fantastic. Oh, there's a bit of an even spread on this one. Lots of you are prioritising different things. The most popular one at the moment, though, is that you're assessing and managing AI-specific risks. But only marginally that's in front. Yeah, keep voting if you can, folks. We're still waiting for a few votes to come in. Hope you're not all having an afternoon snooze during our webinar. Yeah, we'll close that shortly. But at the moment, it definitely looks like the front runner on that one was that you're assessing and managing AI specific risks. So that's your priority for the next 6 to 12 months. Perfect. That has been closed. Right. So it wouldn't be right me coming on this webinar this afternoon as sales director if I didn't mention a couple of products that could help you. So on this slide we're sharing now, we have 4 products and services that we are currently offering. So we have a gap analysis tool, which is popular. We have e-learning. So if you wanted quite a cost-effective way of rolling out some information to your organization, e-learning is definitely the way forward. We have an AI policy template, so where we were discussing earlier in the webinar about making that first step, doing something is better than nothing. The template is very much somewhere you can start a relatively low budget. And of course, you can purchase a copy of the 42001 standard from our website as well, if you so wish to know all of the information there. So 4 products we can help you with. They're all on our website. You can drop us an email if you require any information on any of those things. The gap analysis tool, the e-learning, the policy template, and the 42001 standard. Okay, now this is the fun bit. So I'm going to have to facilitate the Q&A. So what I thought I'd do is we've got about 10 minutes roughly left of this webinar. We have got oodles of questions that have come in, so we won't get through them all, but I'll start from the first one, or one of the first that was submitted, and it's for Andrew. So Andrew, our head of consultancy here. Andrew, coming to you with Canada's AI and Data Act and the UK's position paper on AI regulations, what do I need to factor in alongside EU AI Act in a global company, just to future-proof policies, standards and framework when we're looking to become 42,000 compliant? That's very long.
I'll try and give a very quick answer to that. This is where 42001 really helps you. Because if you're global, you've got all these different things going on. 42001 at least gives you a structure to approach the problem. So what you would do there is you would implement a baseline, based on the clauses and controls that you need in 42001. Then for each separate region, if there are specific differences that you need to do, you build it into that region. So you might have an additional section on a policy or a procedure or something in the Canadian area. You might not need that in the UK. So you have a baseline requirement. You need to do it as probably, doing the baseline as the highest practical level you can do for all of the group. It's exactly the way you would deal with data protection. So if you work in the UK, Canada and European Union, you've basically got 3 different data protection laws. So you do what's common across them all, and then in different regulatory areas, you make sure that you cover that. But that is where, through the clauses in 42001, and you've got to recognise and deal with your contractual legal regulatory requirements, you've got the structure to deal with that. Okay. Thank you, Sophie.
Thank you very much. That was fantastic. Okay, somebody's asked, are there any slides? Yep, we've been showing them through the presentation, and we will share them after the webinar as well with the recording. It does usually also go onto YouTube, so you won't be able to miss it. It's readily available. Adam, I'm going to come to you if that's okay, with a question that's come in. So 99% of the time, organisations go for ISO certification for commercial benefit. For example, they need the certification to gain new contracts. It would be great if organisations wanted to implement just to be the most secure. However, this is rarely the case. Do you think, so I'm just extending my screen here, this is another long question. Do you think it will only become popular when clients or suppliers mandate it in new contracts? What do you think, Adam?
It's an interesting one, because what are the driving factors for different organizations? So obviously, if you're a commercial enterprise, you're a business out there looking to make money, your customer demand is going to drive those things, isn't it? I mean, it's the kind of unspoken part of compliance that a lot of our industry is driven by, the fact that you can't put out to tender if you haven't got your 9001 or your 27001. But the underlying reason for that is it's to provide assurance. So if it's 9001, it's, you get that to say that an external body has gone away and assessed you against an industry recognized standard for quality. Same with information security. So if you're purchasing an information security platform, you want some way of doing that. And it's also a nice way for businesses to not have to audit every supplier, because as a company, you've gone away and you've done that, and you've got that external audit. As much as people like me would dearly hope that it was for the security and the quality and the risk benefits to the business. I think we have to look at that. And to be honest, it's which ones are going to be the most popular. I would imagine it's going to be something with the most broadest recognized name. And I think the ISO standard for the UK and the EU is definitely going to be one of those things. The ISO 42001 standard is clearly got a lot of overlap with the EU Act. So if you need to commercially or legally comply with that, you're selling into the EU with AI tools, I would imagine that's a great starting place. But can I say, you know, who's the front runners? It's too early to tell, I think. But I think 42001 is a strong place to start. Hopefully that's answered the question.
It has. Thank you, Adam. Perfect. And I think we might just have time for one last question. And I think we should probably go to Camden for this one, if that's okay. Camden, what AI laws and acts do UK companies need to follow? This particular organisation are a software supplier to NHS UK. So what laws and acts do UK companies follow?
So this was the one I said I think I'd prefer to answer that separately, if that's okay, but I will follow up afterwards.
That's fine. Absolutely fine. Yeah, let's move on. While you're off mute, I've got another one for you. Please explain a little bit more about transparency requirements.
So when we talk about transparency requirements in the context of the AI Act, we're basically talking about just making it clear to people when they're interacting with AI and giving them enough information basically just to understand what the system's doing. So, for example, if someone is chatting with a bot, they should know that it's not human. And if they're reading content that has been generated by AI, that needs to be clearly labelled. And also, if a system is making or influencing decisions that affect them, I mentioned a couple of times, like credit scoring, for example, people have a right to know that too. So the whole idea here is just that users shouldn't be left guessing. They need to be able to recognize AI when they see it, and ideally kind of just understand at a basic level like how it works and what role it's playing. I think kind of in theory it's actually one of the simpler parts of the Act, but in practice kind of it still gets missed, especially with generative tools. So yeah, it's kind of an important piece of that puzzle if you want to build trust.
Thank you very much. That was great. Look, we're nearly out of time, folks. So I'm just going to whiz through the last couple of slides just to kind of say thank you for your time this afternoon. We've had an unprecedented amount of people join the webinar, which is great to see. Thank you for your support as always. Just to let you know, you can contact us. Here's some of our details. You can absolutely email, phone, and there's our address on there as well. We will be sending the slides out and the recording for you. And of course, if you do need to get in touch, do so there through our service centre email address. And if you wanted to address any questions directly to any of us on the call, just drop our name in there and it will make sure it gets to the right person. But yeah, thank you so much. It's lovely to have you all, and we'll see you again soon. Bye bye for now.
So